A little salty today, but we got David also in California. How are you, David? You're on with Dennis and Matt.
Well, Hi, guys. I'm a little nervous about coming on after those two calls.
Just don't try to tell us what we think.
Yeah, I'll let Dennis. I'll let Dennis steer for a while.
Either one, it doesn't matter. Look, the reason I'm calling.
It says here you were calling in to talk about the true intention of the Gospels, who wrote them, blah, blah, blah.
Yes. Because I got to tell you that my research has showed that most of the modern scholarship that has been done on the historical Jesus is wrong. And there's a whole different picture that actually exists of Jesus if you understand what the Gospels are all about.
I think you and I are going to find a lot of disagreement here fairly quickly.
Quite possible.
But I hope that's not the case, because I have friends who are mythicists, and mythicists, for me, fall into a couple different categories. There are the ones who are far more conspiracy-minded, where the scholarship's questionable, where they start talking about how Christianity was invented in the 4th century by the Pope and the Masons. And then there's others who are properly skeptical, who say, hey, we just don't have the sufficient evidence to conclude that this person actually existed or that we have a good record of what they did or didn't do.
Right.
And I'm fine with that.
Okay, but if I explain to you that the Gospels are not what you've been taught, that they are actually political propaganda, and that the parables reflect that political movement, and that there are other things outside of the New Testament and all the other, supposed proofs that Jesus existed.
It sounds like we're getting.
You don't.
It sounds like we're getting dangerously close to like Caesar's Messiah level conspiracy theorist crap.
Well, it's historical. I don't know if that's crap or not, but it's historical, and I can tell you pretty much who wrote at least Mark and Luke Gospels, and I have a pretty good idea that the same person wrote the Joseph and Asenath treatise. That would have been done by Philo of Alexandria.
Yeah, I've been down this road before, David. It's not relevant to the show. I have no interest in it, and we're going to argue back and forth where you're convinced that you've figured out the great mystery of who wrote it, and you're not going to convince me.
Okay, why is that?
Because I've studied this stuff, and the other people who are also experts in this have failed to convince me. And one of the things is because we're looking at a historical record. I tell you what, when was the Gospel of Mark written?
Very early.
Okay.
Very early. Like, it would have been written. Parts of it would have been written just after 24 CE.
Okay, I would have
very early.
I would have dated it slightly later than that, actually.
No, these are very early. They're propaganda, and propaganda is only useful during the lifetime of its subject or the movement.
Here's the problem. Your date for Mark does not match up with even the other mythicists that I've talked with.
I know. I know.
And so
believe me, I'm not moved by that at all. I mean, I've listened to Richard Carrier and some of the other mythicists, and they don't understand. They take the Gospels at face value. And when you understand that Philo probably was involved in writing Mark and Luke, you understand that there's deep levels of allegory.
And when you understand that the lizard reptilians are secretly controlling the government.
No. Has anybody ever explained to you the fact that the Gospels are written the same way that Philo wrote his stuff? They're basically Jewish writings written in Greek with Latin titles. And Mark and Luke are Latin names. They're not Hebrew names. They're Latin names. Mark is from Marcus, for the god of war, and Luke is for Lucifer, the bringer of light. Yeah, so here's the thing. You should get a hold of Carrier or Fitzgerald and see if they want to have a discussion about that. But this isn't what this show is. Oh, okay. Well, I thought if it kind of basically went against or showed up the fact that mythicism isn't really based on a non-existent Jesus, that there was a historical Jesus and that people knew about him and wrote about him, that would be important. But apparently not.
So you are so far out from all scholarship that what you need to do is do the work and present it such that it becomes and is addressed by experts. You don't need to be calling in to an atheist show where neither one of us have any expertise in the subject of dating these or comparing the originals, which you don't have anyway. There's nothing that can be resolved here other than you're talking about something that to even some of the farthest out there mythicists is going to be disregarded and dismissed. And so there's nothing we can do on this show that's going to be good for any of us.
Okay. I've seen your show where you had somebody on, I can't remember his name, and he was very, very much in touch with the historical Jesus, and this caller called in. I have tried getting in touch with well-known scholars, people that are archaeologists and professors of, biblical studies, and they have the same attitude. It's like, oh, it's too far out. It's too much of a stretch.
Yeah, so do the homework and get it published and show them that you're right. That's the way this stuff's supposed to work.
Except that, and Richard Carrier is aware of this, they don't listen. They don't want to admit.
Well, tough. That doesn't mean you call into some random show that has no expertise and no dog in this fight.
As I said, I've listened to your show before, and there was an expert on there. Sorry that, you guys are not familiar with this point of view. Don't want to waste any more.
I am familiar with this point of view, which is why I'm not interested in talking about it. Thanks. It's for those who didn't understand a lot of what went on in that conversation. I know I touched on the fact that there's different categories of mythicists.
Yeah.
The whole thing is there are a group of people who are convinced that Jesus never existed as a historical figure. I'm on record of saying I'm not really bothered about whether he did or not. It's true that if Jesus never existed as an historical figure, Christianity fails, like right before you.
Well, out of the gate, yeah.
The problem is there's no way to demonstrate this. When you're talking about looking back at history, the best you can come up with is kind of inferences and suspicions, and it's like, well, this was written around this time and seems similar to this, which is exactly where it went. Oh, if you're
right.
familiar with the way Philo wrote, you'll see his hand marks on here. Well, there's also the possibility that somebody familiar with Philo was doing that there was a style that was being emulated. There's also this notion that Paul points out that there were books being run around forged in his name. It's even written there on one of the books that most scholars think was actually forged in his name, because that's what you would do. If I wanted to send a letter to the ACA from Dennis Loubet, I would compose a letter as if I were Dennis and put, you can tell that this is really me because it's actually coming from my email address, and then I would find somebody who could spoof your email address and send it that way. That's exactly what somebody would do. Now, how do you tell the difference? The problem is we don't have access to originals. We don't have access to the eyewitnesses. We don't have access to historical documents of that time that would confirm it. Right. And here's the thing.
Nothing contemporary.
Oh, I just said here's the thing after somebody pointed out that was my thing to say was here's the thing. If you look at all this, the fact that there's any question at all about whether or not Jesus was a historical figure, doesn't matter whether you go way out into the conspiracy theorist weeds or you're still within the realm of modern scholarship, the fact that God has not cleared this up is a damning enough problem for Christianity. The fact that this is an issue that isn't the most solid fact of all of history is already damning to Christianity. Because if you're God and you come down to earth at a time when there's no way to record this, where most people are illiterate, where proper scientific testing and skepticism and critical thinking are still far in the future of what we're doing. We're at the very beginning of, we haven't even reached like Enlightenment era stuff.
No.
Certainly nothing modern. And you decide this is the exact perfect point in time for me to come down and sacrifice myself to serve as a loophole for the rules that I'm in charge of. And this should be good enough evidence for everybody. You're a dipshit, because that is exactly the wrong time to do it.
Yeah, it's like you should ask God, have you met people?
Yeah.
I mean,
It's frustrating because, God is all knowing and all wonderful and all this stuff, and he's going to do this. Yet pick your religion. This God is not ever telling us anything that is incredibly novel to the people who are there.
Yeah, it's all through intermediaries, and it's all... there's the people who always talk about how, how this scientific discovery and that scientific discovery was predicted in the Bible or the Quran or all this other stuff. And you go, then why didn't those people discover that and use it, and they had a huge head start. Why didn't they figure it out?
The time that it became actual knowledge is when we tested it and
Is when
confirmed
it
it.
became actual knowledge.
Not when somebody revealed a vague message that only in hindsight were you able to suspect was about that. Plus, this is all a bit like, hey, I've got a God, but he goes to a different school and you don't know him. That's the way this communication's going.
There was a character in, was it South Park? Captain Hindsight? Who would show up at a burning building and fly in with his cape, and everybody would look up to him, and he'd go, "Well, you should have had this. You should have had fire extinguishers in the upper stories, and you should have done this, and you should have done that." And they go, "Thank you, Captain.
Should have turned that stove off before you left the house."
Thank you, Captain Hindsight." Yeah.